Chosen one, step into the room, all of you carrying that quiet fire. You didn't stumble here by accident, you were summoned. The kind of light you carry doesn't go unnoticed, and it doesn't go unchallenged either. But here's the thing. No amount of noise can drown out what was written over your life. You've been underestimated, targeted, even misunderstood, but still standing. And not just standing, rising. You're not here to fit in. You're here to set the temperature. So take a breath, hold your head up, and feel it in your chest. You are not ordinary. You're not here to survive their storms. You are here to outshine them. Tonight isn't just about watching the chaos unfold. It's about recognizing who you've always been, the calm in the center of it, the force they couldn't break, the one they didn't see coming. Welcome, anointed ones. The stage is yours. Something unsettling brews when alliances are built on resentment. The coalition that once moved like a single organism, hell-bent on tearing one soul apart, is now fracturing from the inside. What once appeared to be an unbreakable unit is splintering into chaos. The target they aim to crush remains untouched, while their own hands are now stained from clawing at each other, looking for purpose and peace. Hit subscribe and start the journey. When people fasten themselves together with nothing but bitterness as glue, the bond rots quickly once its prey steps beyond reach. They were never allies for the sake of loyalty. They were only co-conspirators, chasing a shared vendetta. Now, stripped of their common enemy, they stumble into confusion, accusing one another of treachery, leaking confidences that were once guarded like gold, and dismantling the very structure they thought would overpower everything in their path. Even now, the person they tried to break stands silent, removed from the scene, while those who schemed and plotted sink into the bedlam of their own creation. No force from outside needed to intervene. Their hostility has ricocheted, searching desperately for a new direction and finding none. So it feeds on them instead. The foundation of deceit and spite they built could not sustain itself once its target no longer bore the weight of their anger. The instigator is branded a traitor. The one who sowed discord is unmasked as deceitful. Their fragile network unravels thread by thread, and the fortress they assembled against someone else now cages only themselves. All the noise they made, all the strikes they planned, none of it could pierce the armor that protected what they sought to destroy. Now, they remain trapped among themselves, devouring one another, while the one they despised walks free, untouchable, and radiant. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. What began as a carefully laid snare against one became the stage of their undoing. They assembled in secret corners, convinced they could dictate the outcome by whispers and schemes, never realizing that the ground beneath them was shifting even as they plotted. Every word spoken against their target rewrote the very air around them, setting in motion consequences they couldn't perceive. While they crafted their moves, the fabric of their alliance unraveled invisibly. What they intended as a strategy disintegrated into confusion and mistrust before it ever reached its mark. It wasn't merely that harm was deflected. Their entire arrangement was rewired, so their strikes fell inward, dismantling the very trust that held them together. Where once they moved with precision, they stumbled, clashing, turning on each other as suspicion bloomed. Their blueprint backfired quietly at first, small arguments, fleeting doubts, but soon escalated into open hostility. Each attempt to push their agenda misfired spectacularly, twisting their own intentions against them. They accused, second-guessed, and fractured until the walls of their unity collapsed around them. Their alliance had only ever been strong enough to conceal their private motives, but not strong enough to survive them being exposed. What they believed to be their domain was already reconfigured long before they even began. Every decision they made tightened snare around themselves, not their intended victim. Now they stumble through a maze they unknowingly built, where every exit leads them back into conflict. Meanwhile, the one they meant to harm remains beyond reach, not because of chance, but because every path to them was quietly erased. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of a sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor his kingdom. May his grace guide you always. Names carry weight, and theirs couldn't bear the one they kept repeating. Each time it left their lips, it revealed more than they intended, stripping away the polish on their intentions, leaving raw truths behind. At first, it masqueraded as harmless chatter, passing remarks, and empty laughter. Yet the more they spoke, the more their own insecurity surfaced. It became clear they weren't just speaking about someone. They were reflecting what they feared in themselves. Each mention betrayed the envy they tried to hide, the resentment they dressed as humor, the inadequacy they buried beneath performative smiles. The more they tried to diminish the name, the more it became a mirror exposing the fractures in their own spirits. Their conversations spiraled into accusation and mistrust. The person they confided in yesterday now whispers about them today. Secrets traded freely in confidence have turned into ammunition, fired back at one another. The simple act of speaking that name ignited an unraveling they couldn't stop. The alliances they leaned on now reveal who was competing, who was pretending, and who was quietly fueling the chaos all along. The energy they aimed outward is now consuming them from within. The light they tried to extinguish only illuminated the cracks in their unity. And now that the name continues to rise in spite of them, it has become the signal flare of everything they sought to conceal. The illusions they wore no longer fit, their expressions betray them, and the reflection they see when that name is spoken is one they can't bear to face anymore. What they couldn't break in front of them, they began breaking in each other. They funneled every ounce of malice into their plan, assembling with false courage, convincing themselves they held the power to unmake what they envied. Words sharpened, strategies rehearsed, they unleashed everything they could muster, and yet nothing struck its intended mark. Still, they could not stop. Some hearts are so consumed with conflict they cannot imagine stillness without a rival. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. When their target remained beyond reach, they turned their venom toward the next nearest thing, themselves. That is the unspoken rule of misguided warfare. If the intended blow is deflected, it ricochets. Shielded from harm, the one they despised stood unshaken while the hostility spun back, cutting through the fragile ties of the camp that unleashed it. Suspicion crept in. Resentment surfaced. Silent grudges erupted. Those who once joined forces to tear someone down now tear at each other with twice the fervor. And this isn't merely petty bickering. It's a deeper kind of conflict, one that consumes from the inside out. They invited in bitterness, control, and rivalry. And those forces don't just fade quietly. They find new prey. The narratives they once whispered about another are now aimed at each other, and the circle that once felt solid is collapsing into chaos. The trust they claim to have has splintered into accusations and fractures. Every alliance has dissolved into ash, the very hostility they crafted now choking them where they stand. What they fail to grasp is that protection isn't just about shielding one from harm. It's about letting malicious intent undo itself. What they released couldn't reach its destination, so it dismantled the ones who carried it instead. Now, they walk in endless loops of fear and betrayal, trapped not by chance, but by the return of their own malice. They didn't simply fail in their mission. They destroyed what little stability they clung to in the process, leaving only the ruins of what they built in haste and hate. What bound them together was never what it seemed. On the surface, it looked seamless, a shared cause, mutual trust, solidarity forged in adversity. But beneath the surface, it was nothing more than a fragile illusion masquerading as connection. It was never about care, never about truth. It was a desperate agreement to focus their emptiness outward instead of facing it inward. A counterfeit camaraderie stitched together by envy and a hollow craving to belong, even if it meant belonging to something rotten. That kind of alliance has no roots and no future. It was always destined to collapse, because no higher purpose ever sanctioned it. Every shallow bond pretending to be family was nothing more than a brittle arrangement, and once it lost its false center, the facade crumbled. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor his kingdom. May his grace guide you always. The cracks widened quickly. Disagreements became rifts. Mistrust grew louder than their laughter. What once sounded harmonious dissolved into competing voices, each pulling in a different direction. One craves retribution. Another longs to escape. Another clings to the old obsession, while the rest scatter in confusion. When people join forces for the wrong reasons, they can build nothing lasting. What may appear strong at first soon reveals itself as a fragile construct of pride and rebellion. Their words no longer align. Their intentions no longer match. Whatever energy once held them together has unraveled completely, leaving them at odds, bewildered, and fractured. Now, they flounder in the ruins of their own creation. The one who fueled their unity has slipped beyond reach, and the force that bound them has evaporated. What they thought was loyalty was simply a cage, and when the lock broke, all that remained were scattered pieces of an unfinished conflict, a conflict that devoured them before it ever touched its intended target. What they despised was never the one they pointed at. It was what was revealed back to them when they looked too closely. Without meaning to, someone became the canvas for everything they tried to deny about themselves. The quiet strength unsettled them, not because it harmed them, but because it made their own fragility obvious. The refusal to engage in their chaos unsettled them further, making their own restlessness harder to ignore. Every step forward that they witnessed in another cast light on the places in themselves that stayed stagnant. But rather than face those shadows, they took the easier road and flung accusations outward, believing it would make the discomfort stop. They hurled names and stories, hoping something would stick so they could avoid their own reflection. They called someone conceited to mask their jealousy. They branded another as insincere to keep their own pretense hidden. They painted someone as the villain, so they wouldn't have to own the ugliness within themselves. But now that nothing worked, now that the same person continues to stand while they crumble, they're left staring at what they've become. The illusion they clung to, that another person was the source of all their bitterness, has started to fracture. And with that person out of the equation, they can no longer pretend. The bitterness still sits in their chest. The flaws they named in someone else now glare back at them from each other's faces. That is why the arguments now feel different. It's not just anger, it's embarrassment. The shame of realizing the accusations never fit, and that they only chose that scapegoat because it was easier than admitting they were lost. Now, unable to bear what's been revealed, they claw at each other instead. Anything to keep from saying what they know deep down. The real fight was always within. They imagined that tearing someone else down would open the door to everything they thought they deserved. In their minds, dimming someone else's light would somehow make theirs brighter. Taking what wasn't meant for them would finally validate their existence. That was their mistake, believing that what they lacked could be stolen instead of earned. But now, after all their effort, they're left standing in the wreckage of everything they shattered to reach for what they never understood. The silence of the one they attacked only amplified their desperation. While they scrambled and schemed, that silence held a mirror to their frenzy, and it became obvious to everyone that their obsession had consumed them. The lies they carefully crafted no longer persuade anyone. The applause they expected never arrived. The favor they assumed would transfer to them has slipped through their fingers. What remains is only each other, and even that bond is fraying fast. Because once the illusion of someone else's defeat evaporated, the truth of their own emptiness was all that was left. They now bicker over scraps, over who deserves credit for the failure, over whose name still holds weight, as if anything remains to fight for. It's pitiful. It's transparent. This is what happens when people chase recognition without understanding the cost. They never wanted the burden of what they envied, only the appearance of it. But no title, no influence, no peace can be claimed through envy. Those are earned by endurance, and endurance was never theirs to claim. So the one they despised keeps ascending, untouched, while they are left entangled in the ruins of their own ambition. What they once believed was their path to glory has revealed itself as nothing but debris, and they're still scrambling through it. Unaware the crown they sought was never within reach, and the throne they coveted was never empty to begin with. There are some who believe their cunning cannot be resisted. They perfected their craft, spinning stories, planting doubt wherever they walked, leaving fractures behind like it was an art form. They believed the whole room would bend to their narrative, that everyone was just waiting to follow their lead. And for a time, it seemed to work. They convinced others. They stirred suspicion. They mistook disruption for strength and control for respect. But when their games reached someone unshakable, everything stopped. Their usual maneuvers fell flat. No reaction came. No confusion followed. Instead of chaos, they found composure. And that shift rattled them. All their certainty dissolved when they met someone anchored too deeply to be moved. The calm dismantled their rhythm. The clarity cut through their fog. Every attempt to manipulate bounced back, revealing just how fragile their influence really was. That's when cracks appeared in their confidence. They became furious, not just at the one who didn't break, but at themselves for losing grip. The weight of their failed tactics grew heavier as the people they once controlled began to see through the facade. Their momentum collapsed. Their whispers fell flat, and the stillness they encountered made their own frenzy all the more obvious. Now they thrash around, pointing fingers, rewriting stories, trying to regain their footing. But the spell is broken. There was no fight to win because their opponent never even stepped into the ring. By simply standing firm, the whole performance unraveled. And now, while they stumble and accuse each other in frustration, the one they couldn't topple remains steady, untouchable, unshaken, upheld by something far beyond what they could ever understand. There are moments when silence is mistaken for weakness, and that miscalculation undoes everything. They believed they could speak unchecked, weaving narratives with impunity, certain no one was listening. But the quiet around them wasn't absence, it was observation. Convinced of their own brilliance, they grew bolder, thinking their cruelty would never catch up to them. Every word they uttered, every plan whispered in dark corners, every careless confession became part of a record they couldn't erase. What they thought was victory was nothing more than the slow tightening of the net around them. While they laughed and schemed, the very fabric of their alliance began unraveling, not because of confrontation, but because their own words betrayed them. They didn't notice the weight of what they'd said until it started echoing back, reshuffled, repeated, revealing more than they intended. The very people they colluded with started questioning each other. Snippets of conversations resurfaced in unexpected places. Things they shared in confidence began leaking into the open. Mistrust seeped into every corner of their circle as their secrets became weapons. The collapse didn't need to be forced. The truth carried its own gravity. No retaliation was necessary. The damage was already self-inflicted. The mask slipped, the alliances fractured, and the same voices that once shouted in unison now stumbled over contradictions. They never realized they were speaking into the void, and the void was keeping score. Their own arrogance carried them into exposure, and while they scrambled to contain the fallout, the one they sought to harm simply remained still, letting the quiet do the work. In the end, they weren't undone by an enemy. They were undone by the sound of their own voices echoing back at them, sharper and louder than they ever expected. They thought they could summon destruction and tell it where to go. They mistook darkness for an obedient servant, assuming they could aim its fury at someone else and remain untouched themselves. But shadows have no allegiance. Once invited, they spread wherever they choose, without warning or mercy. In the beginning, it gave them a rush. They moved with audacity, convinced their ruthlessness was strength. But what they felt wasn't confidence. It was something else wearing their skin. They allowed bitterness to steer them, thinking they were merely defending their pride. In truth, they became instruments, no longer authors of their own choices. When you stand as the target and cannot be shaken, that force doesn't dissipate, it doubles back. The same venom they unleashed has begun circling, searching for new hosts, and finding only the ones who welcomed it. Their group, once loud and united, now trembles under the weight of its own malice. Every word sounds like an accusation. Every glance feels like betrayal. They're unraveling because the very thing they called upon refuses to leave. They believed it would dissolve after it had done its job, but it has no intention of departing. That energy consumes all it touches. It fractures alliances, turns allies into enemies, whispers lies into every ear it can reach. Meanwhile, You remain outside the fire. You never entertained it, never gave it room to settle, and now it rages through them instead, consuming everything they thought they controlled. Not because of some distant karma, but because destruction doesn't honor contracts signed in envy. It only devours what stands in its path, and now it's collecting its due. They built an entire narrative around what they assumed you'd never become. In their minds, you were meant to stay hesitant, fragile, silent, easily managed, and never a threat. That version of you served their story perfectly. Small enough to mock, broken enough to dismiss, quiet enough to overlook. That illusion made them feel superior. They mistook your wounds for weakness and your silence for consent. But what they never prepared for was the day you rose. You repaired yourself, stood taller, embraced the truth of who you are, and everything they believed about you began to collapse. Their fantasy couldn't survive your transformation. The image of you they relied on dissolved when you stopped shrinking and started shining. The thought that you, the one they dismissed, the one they counted out, could not only endure but thrive shattered their sense of control. Now they are not just angry, they are disoriented. Your rise forced them to confront the gap between their imagined power and the reality they've been avoiding. Because if you, the one they once pitied and mocked, could grow beyond their reach, what does that say about them? They have been stuck, bitter, circling the same old grievances while you kept ascending. The truth gnaws at them. They keep repeating their stories, desperate to convince themselves nothing has changed. But their voices sound hollow now because your existence contradicts everything they once claimed. The peace you carry, the progress you've made, the way you stand now, all of it is proof. And the more they cling to their fantasy, the more frustrated they become, because reality keeps breaking through. You remain unshaken while they argue with themselves. The script they wrote about your downfall is useless now, torn apart by the fact that you're living the very future they swore would never belong to you. They didn't realize their own schemes would collapse without resistance. There was no need to counter them, no need to explain or justify anything, because while they were busy weaving their stories, the weight of their own words was already turning against them. Every whisper they thought was harmless, every little aside they believed was safe, began echoing back louder and sharper. They acted bold when they assumed no one was paying attention, slipping into private corners to spin tales and stir doubt. But quiet doesn't mean unobserved. There was no need for shouting to bring the truth forward. No dramatic confrontation was necessary. The same language they used to discredit became the cracks in their foundation. Every dismissive remark, every sly message, every seemingly forgotten conversation has started resurfacing, unraveling them from within. Their unity shattered under suspicion. Every laugh they shared now sounds like mockery. Every compliment feels like a trap. They're searching for the leak, interrogating each other, revising their stories, but the damage is already done. The trust they relied on has dissolved into paranoia. They thought they were orchestrating everything, but now they're scrambling to patch holes they created. The harder they try to fix it, the worse it becomes. Meanwhile, no effort was required on your part. You stayed rooted. You refused to be dragged into the dirt. That's why they're left with the mess, while you remain untouched. They underestimated how easily their own actions would betray them. Their words became the proof, their circle became the audience, and their downfall came not from outside, but from the lies they carried too far. And through it all, your silence stood as the stage where their own confessions played out. Now, while they stumble and point fingers, you move forward, vindicated, whole, and unbothered. They spent endless energy crafting a narrative meant to bury you, editing reality to fit a story where you were always the problem. They rehearsed their lines, played their parts, and even fooled themselves into believing it. But without you speaking a single word, their facade began to crumble under its own weight. The irony is undeniable. They imagined themselves as victims telling the truth, but now the spotlight is fixed on them. Their expressions reveal more than they intend. Their unease speaks louder than any accusation. Even when you say nothing, their guilt is so heavy it screams for you. No defense was necessary, no retaliation required. The truth rose on its own, steady, patient, undeniable. They had plenty of time to course correct, but they used that time to dig deeper, thinking silence was surrender. What they didn't know is that silence in the hands of the resilient is a strategy, not a weakness.